The first thing he knew was the cold. It was a hollow in the vastness of the bed, a space where warmth should have been. Dorian's eyes opened to the pre-dawn gloom of the royal chamber, a world of deep blues and charcoal shadows. For a single, suspended beat of his unbeating heart, there was only confusion. He reached a hand across the cool silk sheets, his fingers searching for the familiar curve of a hip, the soft tangle of her hair. He found only emptiness. The cold was not merely an absence of heat, it was a presence, a void that had swallowed her whole. He sat up, the ancient muscles of his back coiling with a sudden, sharp dread. He reached for their bond, that invisible tether that had connected them since the day she'd accepted his proposal, and found nothing. Not a whisper, not an echo. It was severed, cut clean as if it had never existed at all. The realization hit him like a physical blow. A bond only broke when one party truly, deeply rejected the union. His breath caught in his chest. Celeste? His voice was a rasp in the profound silence of the castle. The sound was absorbed by the heavy tapestries depicting the triumphs of his ancestors, their woven figures seeming to watch him with stoic indifference. Nothing. Only the sigh of the wind against the leaded glass of the windows, a lonely sound that echoed the sudden hollowness inside his chest. The air, which should have carried her scent, a delicate fragrance of night-blooming jasmine and something uniquely her, something like starlight and earth, carried nothing. It was clean, sterile, empty. It was the scent of a room that had been vacated. His gaze swept the chamber, cataloging the familiar objects in the dim light. Her velvet robe was gone from the chair where she always left it. The silver-backed brush was missing from the vanity. The small book of poetry she read before sleep was not on the bedside table, a cold, methodical inventory of loss. Then he saw it. A flicker of silver on the dark wood of her nightstand, a tiny star in the gloom. He moved, his grace belying the sudden, crushing weight in his soul, and stood over the spot. It was her ring. Not dropped, not misplaced. It was placed precisely in the center of a small, folded piece of parchment. The diamond, a stone he had plucked from the heart of a fallen star, caught the nascent light and fractured it into 1,000 tiny, mocking rainbows. It was the promise they had made, a circle of forever, now broken and left behind like a common trinket. His hand trembled as he reached for it, the first tremor he had felt in centuries. The metal was cold against his skin, a dead weight. Beneath it, the note. Her script, usually a fluid, elegant dance of ink across paper, was stark and brutally concise. I cannot do this. I cannot be what you need me to be. I am not strong enough to stand beside a king. Forgive me for my weakness. Do not follow me. I have made my choice. The signature was not her full name, just a single, distant letter. C. The words were a physical blow. He read them once, twice, a dozen times, but they refused to change, refused to soften. I cannot do this. The coronation, their joining before the eyes of the entire kingdom, the final seal on their union. Today, she could not do this. She had fled on the very morning they were to be crowned king and queen, bound for eternity. I am not strong enough to stand beside a king. The words cut deeper than any blade. He had spent months reassuring her, telling her she was more than worthy, that her strength was what he loved most about her, and she had smiled, had seemed to believe him. Had it all been a lie? Had she been planning this escape all along, wearing a mask of love while counting down the days until she could run? The carefully constructed world he had built around her, the future he had envisioned with a clarity that had frightened him with its intensity, shattered into dust. Do not follow me. I have made my choice. The words were an insult, a drop of poison in a mortal wound. She thought him so weak, so pathetic, that he would chase after a woman who had made it abundantly clear she wanted nothing to do with him. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the ring clutched in his fist, its edges biting into his palm. The parchment fluttered to the floor. He stared at the empty space beside him, the perfect, smooth expanse of sheet where she had lain only hours before. Had she watched him sleep? Had she looked upon his face, this face of a monster who had dared to love her, and felt only revulsion, had this all been a performance? The laughter they had shared in the gardens, the way she would trace the lines of his face as if memorizing a map. The quiet moments of peace, where her presence had been the only anchor in his long, violent existence. Had it all been a carefully crafted illusion to mask her true feelings of fear and entrapment? The thought was a venom that spread through him, colder and more potent than the grave. He had offered her everything, a kingdom, immortality, a love so vast and deep it frightened even him. He, who had conquered armies and bent nations to his will, had laid his heart at her feet, a fragile, hopeful thing, and she had crushed it under her heel as she walked away. The first rays of true dawn pierced the window, slanting across the room in bars of pale gold. It was the dawn of his coronation day, the dawn of his ruin. The light touched the abandoned ring in his hand, and it flared with a brilliant, painful light. He had once told her it held the fire of a newborn star. Now it held only the cold, dead light of betrayal. Dorian, king of the night, ruler of 1,000 territories, sat alone in the ruin of his heart, and for the first time in his eternal life, he felt the true, suffocating darkness descend. He did not move as the sun rose higher, as the castle began to stir with the anticipation of a celebration that would never come. He simply sat, the silence of the room a roaring in his ears, and let the pain remake him. 6 days. 6 days had passed since the world had ended. The coronation robes, woven with silver thread and shadow, lay untouched in their cedar chest. The grand hall, decorated with black roses and shimmering obsidian, had been stripped bare, its festive air replaced by a heavy, waiting silence. The kingdom held its breath, and Dorian let it suffocate. He had not left the royal chambers. He moved through them like a ghost, a specter haunting the scenes of his own greatest happiness and most profound despair. His council, led by the ancient and ever-patient Kale, had tried to breach his solitude. On the 3rd day, Kale had stood outside the heavy oak doors, his voice a low murmur of reason and duty. "My king, the territories grow restless. They require your word, your presence. A king's duty doesn't pause for heartbreak." Dorian had been standing before the cold hearth, staring into the ashes. He'd said nothing. The silence was his only answer, a barricade more formidable than any stone wall. He heard Kale sigh, the sound of a loyal man's frustration, before his footsteps retreated down the long corridor. Let them grow restless. Let the whole world burn. It was already ash and smoke in his heart. He ate nothing, drank nothing. The thirst, a constant companion for his kind, was a dull ache he welcomed, a physical pain to distract from the serrated agony in his soul. He spent the hours tracing her absence. He would stand in the alcove where she used to read, the faint indentation of her body still visible on the velvet cushion. He would walk the length of the balcony where they had watched the moon rise, the memory of her head on his shoulder so vivid it was a physical weight. Each memory was a fresh turn of the knife. He tortured himself with them, replaying every moment, searching for the flaw, the crack in her facade he had been too blind to see. When had the lie begun? Was it there in her eyes the first time he'd told her he loved her, a flicker of fear he had mistaken for awe? Was it in the touch of her hand, a hesitation he had dismissed as maidenly shyness? He had seen her as a beacon of light in his twilight world, a fragile human woman with a spirit of impossible strength. He had believed she saw past the monster, to the man he had been, the man he could be again with her. Now, he saw only his own foolishness. He was a predator, and she was his prey. She had simply been clever enough to orchestrate her own escape before the trap snapped shut forever. The castle began to reflect his neglect. A fine layer of dust settled on the polished surfaces. The candles were left to burn down into shapeless lumps of wax. The servants, sensing the cold fury that radiated from his chambers, moved with hushed steps, their faces etched with fear. The vibrant heart of the kingdom had ceased to beat, and a creeping frost was spreading from the throne room outwards. On the 7th night, he could bear it no longer. The scent of her, though faded, still clung to the draperies, to the pillows, to the very air he breathed. It was a constant torment, a promise of a joy he could no longer have. He had to erase her. Every trace. It was a cruel necessity, an amputation of the soul, but the limb was already gangrenous. He moved with a grim, deliberate purpose, throwing open the doors to her wardrobe. Gowns of silk and velvet tumbled out, their rich colors, sapphire blue, emerald green, deep crimson, a vibrant mockery of the gray landscape of his grief. He saw the white dress she had worn the night he proposed, its lace as delicate as a spider's web. He remembered the way the moonlight had caught in her hair, the way her eyes had shone with what he had sworn was happiness. He snatched the dress, his fingers crushing the delicate fabric, and threw it onto the floor. One by one, he emptied her life from his. He swept the vanity clear of her silver pots of cream and crystal bottles of perfume, the sound of their shattering on the stone floor a brief, satisfying punctuation to his silent rage. He gathered her books, their pages filled with her notes in the margins, and stacked them in a pile for the fire. Each object was a fresh betrayal, a testament to the life she had built with him, a life she had discarded as easily as a worn-out glove. He was a creature of ice and fury, methodical in his destruction. He left nothing untouched. He was purging his world of her, cauterizing the wound with an act of sheer, unadulterated will. He felt nothing but a cold, clean rage. It was better than the pain. The rage was a fortress. The pain was an ocean, and he had been drowning in it for a week. As he worked, something small and pressed fell from between the pages of one of her poetry books. A flower. Dried and preserved, its petals the color of faded lavender. He picked it up, turning it over in his fingers. It was a marsh violet. They didn't grow anywhere near the castle. They grew in only one place he knew of the Whispering Marshes, 3 days' ride to the north. He frowned. Celeste had never mentioned traveling to the marshes. Why would she have a flower from there? A small, insistent voice in the back of his mind whispered that something was wrong. He ignored it. She had probably picked it on some journey before they'd met, pressed it in a book and forgotten about it. It meant nothing. He crumpled it in his fist and let the dust fall to the floor. Finally, there was only one thing left. A small, rosewood chest on the bottom shelf of her wardrobe, tucked away behind a pair of riding boots. He didn't recognize it. It was simple, unadorned, not her usual style. Curiosity, a flicker of something other than pain or rage, stirred within him. He lifted it. It was unlocked. Inside, nestled amongst dried flowers, more marsh violets, he noted with a cold stirring in his gut and a few sentimental trinkets, was a book. It was a simple, leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with use. This he had never seen. She had kept it from him. Another secret, another lie. A bitter smile touched his lips. Of course. He almost threw it onto the pile with the others, but some impulse stayed his hand. He wanted to know. He wanted to see the truth of her deceit written in her own hand. He wanted to read the words of her confinement, her fear, her desperate plotting to escape him. He wanted to fuel his rage until it burned away the last vestiges of his love. He carried it to the window seat, the cold stone a comfort against his fevered skin. The moon was high and full, flooding the room with a sterile, silver light. He opened the journal. The first several pages were filled with her familiar, graceful script, detailing her life before she had met him. Observations of nature, sketches of flowers, thoughts on the poetry she read. It was the diary of a gentle, thoughtful soul. A soul he thought he knew. He flipped through the pages, his movements impatient, skimming entries about their courtship. He saw his own name, and his heart gave a painful lurch. She wrote of him with a sense of wonder, of trepidation, but also of a surprising, blossoming affection. She wrote of his kindness, a quality no one else had ever seen in him. She wrote of the loneliness she saw in his eyes. He read of her fears, not of him as a monster, but of her own unworthiness, of her inability to stand as an equal beside a king. It was not the narrative he had expected. This was not the journal of a prisoner. It was the journal of a woman falling in love. The The rage began to falter, the ice around his heart beginning to crack. This was a more profound torture than he could have imagined. To see the love he had craved, written in her own hand, only to know it had been a lie after all. What had changed? What had twisted this beautiful, burgeoning love into the cold dismissal of her final note? He turned the pages faster, the rustle of paper loud in the silent room. He reached the last few entries. Her handwriting grew less steady, more hurried. She wrote of the looming coronation, of her excitement and her deep, abiding fear of failing him, of failing his people. There was an entry from 2 weeks before the coronation. My sister Alara sent word from the marshes. She's been having nightmares again, the ones she had after Mother died. I wish I could go to her, but Dorian needs me here for the preparations. I sent her the dried violets from our childhood garden. Perhaps they'll bring her comfort. I pray she finds peace before the coronation. I want her to see me happy, to know that I've found a love worth any fear. Dorian's breath caught. Elara, her sister in the marshes, the violets. His fingers tightened on the journal. And then he came to the final entry. It was dated the morning she had disappeared. The handwriting was a barely legible scrawl, the ink smudged in places as if by frantic, tear-filled hands. The words were a torrent, a desperate, breathless rush that bore no resemblance to her usually composed prose. He is still sleeping. He looks so peaceful, all the burdens of his crown erased by the darkness. Gods, I love him. I love him so much, it feels like my bones will break with it. And that is why I have to do this. That is why I have to destroy him. They came for me at dawn, not for me, for Alara. They have my sister, the Volkov clan. That brute, Malachi, sent a wraith that slipped through our wards like smoke. How? I don't know. Perhaps there's a traitor. Perhaps their magic is stronger than we knew. They showed me a token, Alara's locket, the one Mother gave her. It was stained with blood. They will kill her if I do not come. Alone. Before the blood moon. I cannot tell Dorian. He would raise an army, and they would slaughter her before the first banner was unfurled. Malachi was clear. One word to the king, and my sister dies screaming. My choice is her life or his fury. So I must go. I have to make him believe I am abandoning him. It is the only way to keep him from following. The only way to protect him from the trap they are surely laying. The note. I rewrote it 6 times. Each version was more brutal than the last. It had to wound him. It had to convince him that I didn't just leave, I chose to leave. That I weighed my love against my fear, and fear won. I used his deepest insecurity, the one he confessed to me in the dark, that he fears I find him unworthy, that I see him as beneath me. I am breaking his heart with surgical precision, and the thought of it is breaking mine. But his broken heart is better than his death, better than Alara's. He will hate me. He will think my love was a lie. And he must. He must hate me enough to let me go, to let me walk into their hands without a fight. This is my only choice. A queen's choice. I protect the kingdom by protecting its king, even from himself. I am leaving this here. Hidden. A desperate prayer. A message in a bottle thrown into an uncaring sea. If something happens to me, if I do not return, perhaps one day he will find this. Perhaps one day he will clear away the memories of me and stumble upon this last, true testament, and he will know that I did not run from him. I ran for him, for my sister, for the love that has become the only real thing in my world. Malachi plans something for the blood moon. Tonight. The same night as our coronation. I don't know what, but I feel it in my bones, something dark, something binding. I must endure until then, and pray I can find a way to save Alara before whatever he has planned comes to pass. I pray he never finds this. I pray I can save her and return and spend the rest of eternity begging his forgiveness for the lie I am about to tell. But if he is reading this, Dorian, my love, my king, my only heart, it was never a lie. It was all true. Every last word. I would do anything to protect you. even destroy us. Forgive me. The journal slipped from his fingers. It fell to the floor with a soft thud that echoed in the vast, ringing silence of the chamber. The world tilted on its axis. The cold, hard narrative of betrayal he had so carefully constructed, the narrative that had sustained him in his rage and grief, dissolved into nothing. She had not left him. She had not abandoned him. She had sacrificed herself for him. She had walked willingly into the hands of his most hated enemies, the brutal and sadistic Volkov clan, to save her sister and to save him from his own protective instincts. The ring on the nightstand was not a rejection. It was a shield. The cruel note was not an act of betrayal. It was an act of profound, desperate love, the greatest he had ever known. And he had destroyed her things. He had raged and wallowed while she was enduring unspeakable things. The blood moon. Tonight, he looked at his hands, at the hands that had just torn apart the remnants of her life in a fit of selfish pique. He looked at the shattered crystal on the floor, at the pile of books destined for the fire. He had been mourning a lie while she was living a nightmare. He had been drowning in self-pity while she was enduring torture at the hands of monsters, all to protect him. The pain did not vanish. It transformed. The cold, brittle grief that had encased his heart for a week shattered, and in its place a fire erupted. It was a white-hot, cleansing inferno of pure rage, but this rage was different. It was not the impotent anger of a wounded lover. It was the focused, righteous fury of a king. It was the wrath of a god whose temple had been desecrated. He rose to his feet. The lethargy of the past week fell away like a shroud. The hunger, the thirst, the exhaustion, they were gone, burned away by the sheer force of his will. His eyes, which had been dull with sorrow, now blazed with a terrifying silver light. He could feel every ancient power stirring within him, answering the call of his singular, absolute purpose. Malachi Volkov. He had coveted Dorian's throne for a century, a snarling dog nipping at the heels of a lion. To use Celeste, to use her sister, to twist her love into a weapon against him, and to time it for the blood moon. For a binding ritual, it was an act of such craven depravity that there was no punishment severe enough. But Dorian would invent one. He strode from the room, his bare feet silent on the cold stone. He did not look back at the chaos he had created. That was the room of a broken man. He was no longer that man. He was a weapon, honed by millennia of war and loss, and he was aimed directly at the heart of the Volkov clan. He found Kale in the map room, poring over territorial disputes with a weary resignation. The old vampire looked up as Dorian entered, his eyes widening in surprise at the king's presence, then narrowing in shock at the change in him. The despair was gone, replaced by something far more frightening. "My king," Kale began, rising to his feet. Dorian slammed Celeste's journal onto the great oak table. The sound cracked like a whip in the quiet room. "Read the last page." His voice was unnaturally calm, a low, lethal hum that promised violence. Kale picked up the journal, his brow furrowed in confusion. He read, his expression shifting from puzzlement to dawning horror, and finally to a grim understanding. He looked up at Dorian, his ancient eyes reflecting the king's own cold fire. "Malachi," he breathed. "He has my queen," Dorian said, the words dropping like stones into a deep well. "He has held her for 7 days. He has made her believe I hate her. He has made me believe she betrayed me." He paused, his gaze fixed on the map of the northern territories, the stronghold of the Volkovs marked in crimson. "And tonight is the blood moon. He plans to bind her to him, to use her as a puppet queen to legitimize his claim to my throne." Kale's face went hard as granite. The binding ritual. It requires spoken words, doesn't it? Under duress, under torture. They can extract what they need. Dorian finished, his voice like ice over steel. "Wake the blood guard. Every last one. We ride in 1 hour. And Kale?" He met his oldest friend's eyes. "Find out how that wraith breached our wards. There's a traitor in this castle." Kale bowed his head. "It will be done, my king." Within the hour, Kale returned with grim news. It was Mira, my lord, the chambermaid. She confessed under questioning. The Volkovs turned her months ago, promised to resurrect her dead daughter using blood magic. She disabled the wards in the queen's chambers for precisely 1 hour before dawn. Where is she now? Dorian asked, his voice empty of emotion. The dungeons. Kill her, Dorian said. Quickly, mercifully. She was a tool, nothing more. The hand that wielded her is the one that deserves to suffer. As Kale swept from the room to carry out the order, Dorian remained at the table. He placed his hand on the map, his fingers covering the drawing of the Volkov's mountain fortress, a place called Crow's Peak. He could not feel her, the bond was still severed, still dead. But he would find her. If he had to tear the mountain down stone by stone, he would find her. I am coming, my love, he whispered to the empty room, a vow made to the moon and the stars and the eternal night. Hold on, I am coming. The castle, which had been shrouded in a deathly quiet, began to stir. The sound of running feet, of steel being drawn, of ancient armor being donned. The heart of the kingdom was beating again, a steady, powerful war drum calling for blood. And Dorian, its king, was ready to answer. The journey north was a blur of relentless motion. They rode through the night, a silent gray tide of vengeance sweeping across the land. The Blood Guard, his 50 most elite warriors, moved as one, their mounts great, sable beasts bred for speed and silence devouring the leagues with tireless strides. Dorian rode at their head, a figure of singular, terrifying purpose. The wind whipped his dark hair and snapped his black cloak, but he felt nothing. Not the cold, not the burn of his muscles, not the passage of time. His entire being was focused on one thing, reaching her before the blood moon rose. Before Malachi could complete whatever dark ritual he had planned, he pushed the company without mercy, stopping only when their mounts, hardier than any mortal horse, threatened to founder. During these brief halts, his warriors would drink from wineskins of preserved blood, replenishing their strength, while Dorian stood apart, his gaze fixed on the jagged line of the mountains that grew ever closer on the horizon. He did not need to feed. His rage was sustenance enough. It was a pure, high-octane fuel that burned hotter than any blood. Kale rode beside him, his craggy face a mask of grim determination. He knew better than to offer words of comfort. He offered counsel instead. Crow's Peak is a fortress carved from the mountain's heart, he said, his voice a low rumble against the sound of the wind. One way in, one way out, a narrow, winding path up the cliff face. They will have sentries. They will be expecting a frontal assault. They are expecting a king who believes he has been abandoned, Dorian corrected, his voice flat and cold. They are expecting a kingdom in disarray. They are not expecting a wrathful god at their gates before the blood moon rises. His mind was a razor, cutting through the fog of his grief to the cold, hard calculus of war. Malachi had made a fatal error. He had assumed Dorian's love for Celeste was a weakness he could exploit. He had not understood that for a creature like Dorian, a creature of immense power and profound loneliness, true love was not a weakness. It was an anchor, a forge, a source of terrifying, unimaginable strength. Malachi had not just stolen his queen. He had given his enemy a reason to burn the world down. They found the trail of the kidnappers at the edge of the Whispering Marshes, exactly where Dorian knew Elara lived. A discarded cloak button, a single drop of dried blood on a stone that smelled faintly of Celeste's sister. From there, the path was clear to his heightened senses. He could smell their fear, the scent of 2 human women being dragged through the wilderness by creatures of the night. He could smell Celeste's defiance, a faint, lingering trace of jasmine in the mud, a scent of stubborn life refusing to be extinguished. The trail led them directly toward the ominous, saw-toothed peaks of the Volkov Range. As they began their ascent into the mountains, the air grew thin and cold. The path Kale had described became a reality, a treacherous ribbon of stone clinging to the side of a sheer cliff. Below, a chasm of endless blackness yawned. Above, the fortress of Crow's Peak loomed, a dark stain against the star-dusted sky, its few lit windows like the malevolent eyes of some great, sleeping beast. The blood moon had not yet risen, but Dorian could feel it coming, a pressure in the air, a tightening of invisible threads. They had perhaps 2 hours. "Sentries," Cale murmured, pointing to a dark shape perched on an outcropping 100 yards ahead. Dorian did not slow his pace. He lifted a hand, making a single, sharp gesture. From the ranks behind him, 2 of his bloodguard detached themselves from the column. They melted into the shadows of the rock face, moving with the silent, liquid grace of hunting cats. There was no sound, no cry of alarm. A moment later, a single, sharp whistle, mimicking a nighthawk, echoed down the path. The way was clear. They ascended like ghosts, dispatching sentry after sentry with brutal, silent efficiency. The Volkovs had grown complacent in their impenetrable fortress. They were not prepared for an enemy that moved like the night itself. As they neared the main gates, a massive structure of iron-banded timber, Dorian held up a hand, bringing the column to a halt. "Cale," he said, his voice a low whisper. "You and 20 men will scale the western wall. There is a postern gate near the rookery. Create a diversion, loud, bloody. Draw as many of them as you can to that side." Cale nodded, his eyes gleaming with the prospect of battle. "And you, my king?" "I am going to the heart of the beast," Dorian said. "Malachi will keep her in the deepest part of his fortress, the throne room, or the dungeons beneath it. He will want to gloat. And he will want to perform his ritual where it has the most symbolic power." He looked at the 30 warriors who remained with him, including a scarred veteran named Silas who had served him for 2 centuries. "We are not here to take the fortress. We are not here to hold ground. We are a blade. We will cut through the guards, find the queen, and get her out. Do not be drawn into protracted fights. Kill who you must to clear the path. Our only objective is her safety." His men nodded, their faces grim and set, their hands resting on the hilts of their swords. They were the elite of his kingdom, warriors who had followed him through 100 battles. They understood the mission perfectly. Silas stepped forward. "My king, I've followed you for 3 centuries. Tonight, I follow you into hell itself. We will not fail you." "I know you won't," Dorian said quietly. A sudden cacophony of screams and clashing steel erupted from the western side of the fortress. Cale's diversion. The main gate shuddered as guards from within began to unbar it, rushing out to meet the perceived threat. That was the moment Dorian chose. Now. He breathed. He moved, a black blur of speed, crossing the open ground before the gate in the space of a heartbeat. The Volkov guards, their attention focused on the sounds of Cale's attack, were caught completely by surprise. Dorian's blade, a length of pale, enchanted steel named Sorrow, whispered from its sheath. The first guard died without ever seeing his killer, his head tumbling from his shoulders. The rest of the blood guard followed, a wave of silent, disciplined death crashing against the disorganized defenders. They flowed through the now open gate like water, cutting down anyone who stood in their way. Dorian did not pause. He did not look back. He ran, his senses stretched to their limit, following instinct and centuries of tactical knowledge. The ritual would be performed in a place of power, deep, central, sacred to the Volkovs. He descended. The fortress was a maze of cold, rough-hewn stone corridors, lit by sputtering torches that cast long, dancing shadows. The air was thick with the stench of stale blood and fear. He could hear the sounds of fighting echoing from above and behind him, Cale's diversion working perfectly. But down here, in the bowels of the mountain, it was eerily quiet. He descended a winding staircase, his steps making no sound. The air grew colder, damper. He could smell old magic here, dark and twisted. The stairs opened into a vast, cavernous chamber. At its center was a raised dais with a crude, throne-like chair carved from black rock, and there, chained to the wall behind the throne, illuminated by a circle of black candles, was Celeste. His world narrowed to that single, horrific tableau. She was pale, her face smudged with dirt and streaked with dried tears. Her dress, the simple traveling gown she must have worn when she left, was torn and stained. Her arms were bruised, marked with cuts, thin lines of red that stood out starkly against her pallor. But her head was high, her eyes, though shadowed with pain and exhaustion, blazing with a fierce, unbroken fire. Chained to the wall beside her was a younger woman, clearly her sister Alara, who was weeping silently, her face buried in Celeste's shoulder. Standing before them, a goblet of blood in his hand, and a ceremonial dagger laid on an altar stone, was Malachi Volkov. He was a brute of a vampire, large and powerfully built, with a cruel, sneering face. The blood moon had just begun to rise, its light filtering down through a shaft in the cavern ceiling, bathing the altar in crimson. Malachi was chanting, low and guttural, in an ancient tongue. He turned as Dorian entered, his eyes widening in genuine shock before a slow, sadistic smile spread across his lips. "Dorian," he said, his voice a gravelly boom that echoed in the chamber. "So, the heartbroken king found his courage after all. I am impressed. I thought you'd still be weeping into your pillow. You're just in time for the ceremony. Your former bride is about to become mine." Dorian's gaze was locked on Celeste. Her eyes met his across the chamber, and he saw a universe of emotion in them: shock, terror, relief, and a profound, heart-wrenching shame. She thought he had come for vengeance. She thought he still believed the lie. She thought he hated her. "Let her go, Malachi," Dorian said, his voice dangerously soft. "And interrupt such a beautiful ritual? The blood moon rises, Dorian. In moments, she will speak the words that bind her to me, and your pathetic dynasty will end." He gestured grandly. "You weren't supposed to come here, you fool. You were supposed to stand before your court and declare her a traitor. Once you spoke those words before the assembled lords, your pride would never let you take them back. Then I would have revealed I held her and watched you choose between your crown and your heart. Either way, you would have destroyed yourself. But this," he laughed, "this is even better. You can watch as she becomes mine." "You forgot one thing," Dorian said, taking a step forward. "What?" "She was never yours to take." From the corridor behind him, his blood guard fanned out into the chamber, their swords drawn, their silent presence filling the space. Malachi's smile faltered for a second as he took in their numbers. He had not anticipated this. He had expected a lone, grief-stricken king, not a disciplined, elite force. "You came prepared," Malachi noted, his tone losing some of its earlier arrogance. He gestured with his goblet to the chains that held Celeste and her sister. "But I still hold the winning hand." He made a sharp gesture. From the alcoves and shadows around the chamber, half a dozen of Malachi's personal guard emerged, heavily armored and carrying crossbows loaded with silver-tipped bolts. They aimed at the prisoners. "One command from me," Malachi said, "and they die before you can cross half this chamber." Celeste finally spoke, her voice hoarse but clear. "Dorian, don't listen to him. Get out, please. This is a trap." Hearing her voice, hearing the love and fear for him in it, nearly shattered what remained of his control. But he forced himself to focus, to think, "What do you want, Malachi?" Dorian asked, his voice still unnervingly calm. "What I have always wanted," Malachi snarled. "Your throne, your kingdom, everything you have that should have been mine. Your line has grown soft, you consorting with a human. It is a disgrace." "My affairs are my own," Dorian replied, taking a slow, deliberate step forward, watching the crossbows track his movement. "This is between you and me. Let the women go. They are not part of this." "She," Malachi spat, gesturing at Celeste, "is the very heart of it. She is your weakness, the weakness I will use to destroy you." "You are mistaken, Malachi," Dorian said, his voice dropping to a whisper that carried to every corner of the chamber. "She is not my weakness." He met Celeste's eyes, pouring all of his love, all of his understanding, all of his regret into that one look. In that moment, something extraordinary happened. The severed bond, the connection he had felt die 7 days ago, flickered. It was faint, barely a thread, but it was there. She saw the truth in his eyes. She understood. He had read the journal. He knew. "She is my strength," Dorian finished. And then he moved. It was not a step or a run. It was an explosion of motion, a flicker of shadow and steel that defied the eye. The crossbows fired, but Dorian's bloodguard were already in motion, a synchronized dance of death they had practiced for centuries. Silas and 2 others threw themselves directly into the path of the bolts aimed at Dorian, their enchanted armor deflecting most, their bodies absorbing what got through. Before Malachi could even register the attack, Dorian was upon him. Malachi was no fool. He had prepared for this confrontation. He wore enchanted armor beneath his robes, and he was faster than his bulk suggested. He drew his own blade, a massive cleaver of dark iron, and met Dorian's first strike with a thunderous clash that sent sparks flying. "I've been preparing for this for 100 years. Malachi roared, driving Dorian back with sheer brute force. They fought across the chamber, their blades a blur of deadly grace and savage power. Malachi was strong, perhaps stronger than Dorian in raw physical might, and he had drunk deep before the ritual fresh blood to enhance his abilities. Around them, the Bloodguard engaged the hidden archers and the reinforcements that were now flooding into the chamber from the upper levels. Steel rang against steel. Men screamed and died. But Dorian's focus was absolute. He saw only Malachi. A silver bolt whistled through the air, aimed directly at Dorian's heart. Silas appeared from nowhere, his body intercepting the shot. The silver burned through his chest like acid through parchment. He gasped, his ancient body unable to withstand the pure, lethal metal. His eyes met Dorian's with perfect clarity and absolute loyalty. "Save her, my king," Silas whispered, his voice fading. "That's all that matters." And then he was ash, disintegrating into the air, his centuries of service ending in a heartbeat of sacrifice. Malachi laughed, the sound of madness and triumph, but the laugh died in his throat. He had made a critical error. In his moment of victory, he had turned his attention away from his true opponent, and he had forgotten about the woman chained to his wall. Celeste had been watching, her heart breaking, her mind racing. She saw Dorian fighting, saw him wounded by Malachi's blade, saw Silas die to save him, and something inside her snapped. She would not be a passive prisoner, not anymore. She looked at the manacle around her left wrist. It was tight, unforgiving iron. But iron could not hold what would not be contained. She took a breath, braced herself against the pain she knew was coming, and with a sharp, brutal twist, she broke her own thumb. The pain was blinding, white-hot, and nauseating, but she bit down on her scream and jerked her hand through the now loosened manacle. Her hand was free. Blood streamed from the dislocated joint, but she was free. A fallen guard lay near the base of the dais, a dagger still clutched in his dead hand. She grabbed it. Malachi had his back to her, pressing his attack on Dorian, driving the king to his knees with the sheer ferocity of his assault. His armor had protected him from Dorian's strikes. He thought himself invincible. Celeste ran. Her bare feet made no sound on the cold stone. She raised the dagger high, and with every ounce of strength in her exhausted, brutalized body, she drove it into Malachi's back, aiming for the gap between his armor plates, just below his shoulder blade. The blade sank deep. Malachi screamed, a high-pitched sound of shock and agony, staggering forward. He whirled toward her, his face contorted in rage and disbelief. "You!" he snarled, raising his blade to strike her down. Sorrow took his sword arm at the elbow. The limb, still clutching the dark iron cleaver, fell to the floor with a wet thud. Malachi stared at the stump, black blood fountaining from the wound, his face a mask of dawning horror. Dorian stepped in front of Celeste, shielding her with his body. His eyes were cold, merciless silver. "You built a trap for a heartbroken man," Dorian said, advancing on the now crippled Volkov chieftain. "You should have built one for a king." What followed was not a fight, it was a judgment. Dorian dismantled Malachi piece by piece, with the cold, methodical precision of a surgeon and the savage fury of an avenging angel. He made it last. He made it hurt. And when there was nothing left of Malachi Volkov but a broken, pleading wreck on the blood-soaked stones, Dorian ended him. Silence fell over the chamber, thick and heavy, broken only by the ragged sound of breathing. The last of Malachi's guards lay dead, dispatched by the peerless skill of the blood guard. Dorian stood over Malachi's corpse, his chest heaving, the red haze of his rage slowly receding. Then he turned. Celeste was standing there, swaying on her feet, her broken hand cradled against her chest, her face pale as death. She was staring at him with those same wide, uncertain eyes. She still thought he might hate her. He crossed the chamber in 3 long strides. She flinched as he reached for her, and the small movement nearly broke him. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry, Dorian. I had to. I didn't want you to." "Shh," he murmured, his blood-stained hands impossibly gentle as they cupped her face. I know everything." He looked into her eyes, let her see the truth written there. "I found your journal. I read your last entry. I know about Alara. I know about the Wraith. I know about the note and why you wrote it." Her breath hitched. You know? "I know that you sacrificed yourself to save your sister and to protect me from walking into this trap," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "I know that you endured a week of hell because you loved me too much to let me die. I know that the note was a lie told out of desperate, impossible love." The understanding dawned in her eyes, and with it, the wall she had built around her heart crumbled. She collapsed against him, her legs giving out, and he caught her, gathering her into his arms as if she weighed nothing at all. She shook uncontrollably, the adrenaline and terror and relief all crashing over her at once. "I thought you hated me," she sobbed into his chest. "I thought when you found me, you'd..." "Never," he said fiercely, holding her tighter. "Never. Do not apologize. You did nothing wrong. You saved my life. You endured this nightmare to protect me. There is no love greater than that, Celeste. No words, no vows, no crown could ever prove what your actions have." He pulled back just enough to look at her, to let her see the boundless love and the profound respect shining in his eyes. "You are the strongest person I have ever known." She looked up at him, tears still falling, but something like hope beginning to bloom in her expression. "I broke your heart. You saved my life," he corrected gently. He pressed his forehead to hers. "And you are the only one who can heal it." One of his men was already freeing Alara from her chains. The young woman stumbled forward, and Celeste reached for her with her good hand, pulling her sister into their embrace. They held each other, the 3 of them, while around them the blood guard secured the chamber. Dorian looked up, his voice ringing with authority. "Burn this fortress to the ground. Leave nothing but cinders and ghosts." He gathered Celeste carefully into his arms, mindful of her injuries, and lifted her. Her broken hand was cradled between them. Alara, wrapped in a guardsman's cloak, followed close behind, her young face marked by trauma but also by the fierce relief of survival. They walked out of that dark, blood-soaked chamber, leaving the carnage and the body of Malachi Volkov behind. Dorian did not look back. He carried her up the winding stairs, through the corridors now empty of enemies, and out into the cold, clean mountain air. The sounds of battle had ceased. Kale and his men had secured the fortress and were already setting fires. Behind them, the first tongues of flame began to lick at the windows of Crow's Peak, a funeral pyre for a clan that had dared to touch his queen. The blood moon hung huge and crimson in the sky, but its power was broken. The ritual had failed, Malachi was dead, and Celeste was safe. Dorian looked down at the woman in his arms. She was staring up at him, her face streaked with tears and dirt and blood, and she had never looked more beautiful. "Take me home," she whispered. "Always," he promised. And he began the long walk down the mountain, his steps sure and steady, carrying her away from the darkness and toward the light of dawn. The journey home was a study in contrasts. Where the ride north had been fueled by frantic, consuming rage, the return was a slow, deliberate procession of care. Dorian refused to let Celeste out of his sight. He relinquished his own mount, taking a place in the covered wagon they had procured from a Volkov stable that had escaped the flames. He sat beside her on a bed of furs, her sleeping form cradled against him. Her broken thumb had been carefully set and wrapped by one of his men who had field medical training. But Dorian held her hand even as she slept, a silent, constant reassurance that he was there, that she was safe. Her sister, Elara, rode in the same wagon, her initial terror slowly giving way to a quiet, awestruck exhaustion. She would watch him as he tended to Celeste, gently cleaning the wounds on her arms with a soft cloth dipped in clean water, his large, warrior's hands impossibly gentle. She saw not the fearsome vampire king of legends, but a man consumed with a desperate, tender love for her sister. On the second night of their journey, when Celeste was asleep and Dorian sat awake, keeping watch, Elara finally spoke. Her voice was small but steady. "Your Majesty, I need to tell you what she did." Dorian looked up from where Celeste slept against his chest. Elara took a shaking breath. "When they brought me to that cell, I was ready to die. I begged Celeste to save herself, to tell you, to let you raise your army. But she refused. She said, 'He would burn the world for me, and they know it. That's why they'll kill you the moment he marches. I won't let you die for my happiness.'" Tears filled the young woman's eyes. Every day, Malachi would come. He would hurt her and ask her if she was ready to curse your name, to give him what he needed to destroy you. And every day, even when she could barely stand, she would look at me and whisper, "He is worth this. We are worth this." She never broke. Not once. Dorian's hand trembled as he stroked Celeste's hair, but he said nothing. Elara continued, her voice growing stronger. "She talked about you constantly. About the way you laugh when you think no one's watching. About how you pretend you don't love the poetry she reads but you've memorized every word. About the future she dreamed of, not as a queen, but as your wife. Why are you telling me this?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Because she'll never tell you herself. She'll blame herself for hurting you. She'll carry that guilt forever." Elara met his eyes, this young human woman looking directly at an ancient vampire king without fear. "But I was there. I saw her break herself into pieces to keep you whole. And I need you to know, when she wrote that note, when she left that ring, she wept so hard I thought her heart would stop. She did the cruelest thing she could imagine because it was the only kind thing left to do." Dorian bowed his head, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. After a long moment, he managed, "Thank you." They rode in silence after that, but it was a companionable silence, the silence of shared understanding. When they finally reached the towering gates of his castle, the entire household was waiting. Kale had sent a rider ahead, and the news of their king's return with his queen had spread like wildfire. A wave of palpable relief washed over the assembled staff and guards. Their king was whole again, their kingdom was safe. Dorian carried Celeste through the great hall, past the silent, bowing courtiers, and up the grand staircase to their chambers. The room had been meticulously restored by the servants. The shattered glass was gone, swept away and replaced. The books had been returned to their shelves, the gowns hung once more in the wardrobe with careful, reverent hands. New bottles of perfume sat on the vanity, exact replacements for what he had destroyed. It was as if his fit of destructive grief had never happened. But he knew the truth. The scars of it were etched onto his soul. He laid her gently on the bed, the same bed where he had woken to the devastating emptiness of her absence. Now, she was here, a warm, breathing reality that chased away the last of the lingering ghosts. He dismissed the waiting physicians with a single look. He would tend to her himself. For the next several days, the world shrank to the confines of that room. He bathed her with warm water and soft cloths, washed the dirt and blood from her skin with infinite care. He fed her broth from a silver spoon, coaxing her to eat even when she had no appetite. He dressed her wounds with salves made from herbs that promoted healing, his fingers gentle on her bruised skin. He sat by her bed while she slept, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest, a sight more precious to him than all the gold in his vaults. He read to her from her favorite books of poetry, his deep voice a soothing balm on her frayed nerves. They spoke little of her captivity in those first days. There would be time for that later. For now, words were inadequate. Their communication was in the language of touch, of presence. It was in the way he would smooth the hair back from her forehead, or the way her hand would seek his in her sleep. It was a slow, quiet rebuilding of trust, not in each other's love that was no longer in doubt, but in the safety of the world itself. On the second night, she woke screaming from a nightmare, her body thrashing against invisible bonds. Dorian gathered her into his arms immediately. "Wake up, love. Wake up. You're safe. You're home." Her eyes flew open, wild and unseeing. For a horrible moment, she didn't recognize him. She struggled against his hold, her breath coming in panicked gasps. "It's me," he whispered, loosening his grip but not releasing her. "It's Dorian. You're safe. You're in our chambers. Elara is safe. You're both safe." Recognition dawned slowly. The fight drained out of her. She collapsed against him, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. He held her through it all, rocking her gently, murmuring promises he prayed he could keep. That she was safe, that he would never let anyone hurt her again, that she was home. When the storm finally passed, she pulled back to look at him, her face ravaged by tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm sorry you have to see me like this." "Never," he said fiercely, cupping her face in his hands. "Never apologize for surviving. Never apologize for being human." "I keep seeing his face. I keep feeling." Her voice broke. "What if I can't get past this? What if I'm broken now?" "Then we'll be broken together," he said simply. "And we'll put each other back together, piece by piece, for as long as it takes." On the fourth day, she was strong enough to sit up on her own, propped against a mountain of pillows. She had been watching him as he stood by the window, staring out at the setting sun, his profile stark and beautiful against the dying light. "Dorian," she said, her voice stronger than it had been. He turned at once, crossing to her side. "You need something? I need you to stop blaming yourself." She reached out, her fingers tracing the tense line of his jaw. "I can see it in your eyes. Every time you look at me, you see my cuts, my bruises, and you hate yourself for it." He could not deny it. He closed his eyes, shame flickering across his features. "I should have known. I should have felt it through our bond. I let my pride blind me. I destroyed this room, Celeste. I was ready to burn every memory of you because I was in pain. While you," his voice broke, "while you were suffering unimaginable things. For me." "You were suffering too," she insisted, her grip on his hand tightening. "I did that to you. I wrote those words. I left that ring. I chose to wound you, Dorian. It was a calculated choice, and it was cruel, but it was the only choice I had." She met his gaze, her eyes clear and certain. "Do you think I don't feel the weight of that? Knowing I broke the heart of the man I love more than life itself, we were both wounded. Malachi held the knife, but the situation wounded us both." He sank to his knees beside the bed, overwhelmed. He rested his forehead against her hand. "I destroyed your things," he confessed, his voice rough with shame. "That night, the seventh night, I tore apart the wardrobe. I shattered your perfume bottles. I was going to burn your books. I wanted to erase you from my world because I couldn't bear the pain of remembering you, Dorian. I'm terrified," he continued, the words pouring out now. "When I'm in pain, I destroy. It's what I've always done, for centuries. I'm terrified that one day I'll destroy us." She was quiet for a moment, then she said softly, "Do you remember the first time you showed me your war room? All those maps, all those battle strategies. And you told me, I've spent 1,000 years learning how to destroy. I don't know if I can learn how to build." He nodded against her hand. And I told you that building is just destruction in reverse. That every act of creation starts with breaking ground, tearing down what was, making space for what could be. She squeezed his hand. You destroyed my things because you were breaking ground for your grief. But you're here now, helping me heal, building us back up. That's the man I love. Not the one who never breaks, but the one who knows how to rebuild. He looked up at her then, and something in his chest that had been clenched tight finally loosened. She was giving him permission to be imperfect, to be broken, to be human, even though he was anything but. Your heart is not broken, she whispered, her fingers stroking his hair. It was only bruised, and mine is beating here with yours. We are not broken, Dorian. We are whole, together. I am stay. I am stay. In that moment, the bond that had been severed snapped back into place. It was not gradual. It was instant, like a rope that had been cut suddenly being rejoined, the two frayed ends fusing together stronger than before. He gasped at the force of it, at the sudden rush of her emotions flooding into him, her love, her pain, her hope, her absolute certainty in them. And he knew she felt it too. Felt his love pouring back into her, his regret and his devotion and his unwavering commitment. You feel it, she breathed, wonder in her voice. Yes, he said, his own voice thick with emotion. I feel you. I feel us. They held each other. The bond between them no longer just a magical connection but something forged in fire and sacrifice, something that had been tested and found true. A week after their return, Alara asked to speak with them both. She sat in the garden, her hands folded in her lap, looking impossibly young in the sunlight that Dorian had learned to tolerate for short periods when heavily cloaked. I need to go home, she said quietly. Celeste's face fell. Alara, you just got here. You're still healing. You're safe here. I'm still broken. Alara interrupted gently. And I need to heal somewhere I understand. Somewhere without magic and immortals, and things that live in eternal night. She gestured at the towering castle around them. Dorian understood immediately. You need normalcy. Yes. She looked at him gratefully. I don't blame you, Your Majesty. Any of you. But every shadow here reminds me of the wraith that came for me. Every darkened corridor reminds me of that cell. I need sunlight and simple things and people who age and die like I will. Celeste was crying. I thought we'd have time. I thought we could. We will have time, Alara said firmly, taking her sister's hand. I'll visit. You'll visit. But right now, I need to go home and remember who I was before all this. You saved my life, Celeste. Now let me live it. It was Dorian who spoke next, his voice gentle. We will make sure you are protected. I will station guards in the marshes, hidden but vigilant. And you will always have a home here, whenever you wish to return. Alara smiled, a real smile for the first time since her rescue. Thank you, Your Majesty, for saving us both, for loving my sister the way she deserves to be loved. 3 days later, they saw Alara off in a comfortable carriage with an escort of Dorian's most trusted men, disguised as merchants. Celeste wept as she watched her sister disappear down the road, but Dorian held her, and she knew it was the right choice. Alara needed to heal in her own way, in her own time. They all did. 3 weeks after the rescue, 3 weeks of nightmares and confessions and slow, painful healing, Dorian came to Celeste with a question. The coronation was meant to happen, he said quietly. They were sitting together in the garden, in a rare moment of peace. The kingdom expects a wedding, a crowning, but I have no need for pageantry anymore. I have no need to prove my right to rule or the legitimacy of our union to anyone. He took her hand, the one with the broken thumb that was healing but would never be quite right, and pressed a kiss to her palm. I need only one thing, to stand with you, before whatever gods are listening, and bind my soul to yours. Not as a king to his consort, but as a man to the woman who is the keeper of his heart. Tears welled in her eyes, but this time they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. Yes, she breathed. Oh, yes, Dorian, yes. 3 days later, they were married. It was not in the Great Hall, with hundreds of vampire lords and ladies in attendance. It was in the quiet solitude of the castle's oldest sanctuary, a small, circular room open to the sky, where the moonlight pooled on the floor like liquid silver. The only attendees were Kale, who stood as Dorian's witness, and a lady-in-waiting named Syrah, who had become dear to Celeste during her recovery, standing as her witness in Alara's absence. Celeste wore a simple gown of deep blue velvet that matched the twilight sky. She wore no jewels except for the ring he slipped back onto her finger, the star diamond seeming to pulse with a gentle, living light. Dorian wore not his royal finery, but a simple black tunic, his only adornment the love and reverence that shone in his eyes as he looked at his bride. There was no priest, no ceremony dictated by ancient law. They stood hand in hand under the moon and stars and spoke their own vows, words that came not from a book, but from the scarred, healed, and deeply entwined landscape of their hearts. Celeste's hand shook as Dorian held it, and he steadied it with his own, his touch gentle. "I, Dorian, take you, Celeste," he began, his voice low and sure. "I pledge to you my heart, which you have already broken and healed a dozen times over." A startled laugh escaped her, half sob, half joy. "I pledge to you my strength, which faltered when I needed it most. I pledge to you my trust, which I will spend eternity learning to give more freely. I pledge to you my imperfect love scarred by my pride, tested by our pain, but unbreakable in its foundation." He took a breath, his silver eyes never leaving hers. "I cannot promise you I will never doubt. I cannot promise you I will never rage or grieve or destroy beautiful things in my despair. I am a creature of darkness, and that darkness lives in me still." Kale shifted uncomfortably. This was not a traditional vow. "But I promise you this," Dorian continued. "I will rebuild. I will learn. I will let you see all of me, the monster and the man, and trust that your love is strong enough to hold them both. I will spend every night of our eternity proving that you did not sacrifice yourself in vain." Tears streamed down her face. "My turn?" He nodded, his own eyes wet. "I, Celeste, take you, Dorian," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "I pledge to you my honesty, which I betrayed once and will never betray again." She saw him flinch, saw him start to protest, but she squeezed his hand. "Let me finish." He nodded. "I pledge to you my courage, which you taught me I possessed. I pledge to you my stubborn, fragile human heart, which will beat for you until it stops, and perhaps even after." A small smile touched her lips. "I pledge to you my imperfect love tested by fear, twisted by impossible choices, but true in every iteration." She took a shaking breath. "I cannot promise you I won't have nightmares. I cannot promise you I won't flinch at shadows or weep at unexpected moments. I cannot promise you that loving me will ever be easy." "I don't want easy," he whispered. "Good," she said, smiling through her tears. "Because I promise you this, I will heal, I will fight. I will stand beside you not as a perfect queen, but as a woman who chose you every day, even when that choice cost me everything. I will spend every sunrise of our eternity proving that my love was never a lie." The moon seemed to pulse with light above them, as if blessing their union. "We're a mess, aren't we?" she whispered. "A beautiful mess," he agreed. "Do you think we'll be okay?" "I think," he said slowly, thoughtfully, "that we'll be broken and healing and fighting and loving each other in turns for the rest of forever. And I think that's more real than any fairy tale." She laughed, the sound bright and genuine and full of life. "Then kiss me, my beautifully broken king." He did. It was not a kiss of frantic passion or desperate relief. It was a kiss of deep, abiding peace, a seal on a promise that had already been tested by fire and found to be true. It was the kiss of a new beginning, a quiet, unshakable covenant made not in the face of a kingdom, but in the sacred space between two souls who had found their home in each other. When they finally pulled apart, Kale cleared his throat. "I have served you for 3 centuries, my king," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. And I have never been more proud to call you my lord than I am in this moment." He bowed deeply. "Love isn't about never breaking, it's about how you put each other back together. You have both proven that truth beyond any doubt." Later, when the vows were spoken and the moon had blessed their union, Dorian and Celeste stood together on the balcony overlooking the kingdom. Her head rested on his shoulder, the same shoulder she'd rested on 1,000 times before, in a life that felt both distant and achingly close. "Your hand is still shaking," he observed quietly, looking at the hand he held in his. "I know. It does that now." She held it up in the moonlight. The thumb she'd broken to escape was healed but would never be quite right. The tremor was permanent, a small but constant reminder. A souvenir. "I'm sorry. Don't be." She laced her fingers with his, steadying the tremor with his touch. "It reminds me what I'm capable of. What we're both capable of." Below them, the kingdom stretched out in peaceful shadow. Somewhere, Alara was sleeping in her childhood home, healing in her own way. Somewhere in the Hall of Honor, Silas's name was being carved into the monument of the honored dead, his sacrifice remembered. Somewhere, far to the north, the ashes of Crow's Peak were scattering in the wind, a dark chapter closed forever. The world was full of broken things. But here, on this balcony, two of those broken things had found each other, and they were choosing every day to be broken together, to heal together, to build something new from the ruins of who they'd been. "I love you," she said. "I love you," he answered. And for tonight, in this moment, that was enough. 2 weeks later, the formal coronation took place. It was a subdued affair compared to what had originally been planned, but it was necessary for the kingdom. Dorian stood before his assembled lords and formally named Celeste his queen. There were whispers, of course. There always would be. A human queen was unprecedented. But when she stood before the council and fielded their questions with grace and an unexpected steel, when she made a ruling on a territorial dispute that surprised even Dorian with its wisdom and fairness, the whispers began to change. She was not what they expected. She was something better. That night, after the formalities were complete and the crown rested on her head, a delicate circlet of silver and moonstone that Dorian had commissioned specifically for her, they returned to their chambers. She removed the crown and set it aside, then turned to him with a smile. "A queen?" she said wonderingly. "You were always a queen," he replied, pulling her into his arms. "The crown just makes it official." She rested her head against his chest, listening to the place where his heart would beat if he were human. The bond between them hummed with contentment, with love, with the quiet certainty of forever. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," he said, "we live, we heal, we rule, we love." He tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "We build our eternity, one imperfect, beautiful day at a time." "I can live with that," she whispered. "So can I," he said. And as the moon rose over the kingdom, casting its silver light through their window, the king and queen of night held each other close. They were scarred. They were healing. They were imperfect and beautifully, impossibly real. And they were, finally and forever, home.